I stared at my phone, my hands trembling as the words burned into my eyes. You're dead to me. Don't ever contact me again. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My own son, my flesh and blood, had just cut me out of his life with one cruel message. My heart felt like it had been ripped from my chest, and the room around me spun as though the ground itself was collapsing. I had raised him. I had sacrificed everything for him. And now I was nothing but a ghost in his world. But was it really me he hated? Or was someone whispering lies into his ears? That night, as I sat in the dark, staring at that single text over and over, one thought grew louder than my pain. If he wanted me gone, he had no idea what I was about to do next. When I think back to the earliest days of my life as a parent, I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, fragile yet full of promise, and I whispered to myself that I would protect him from everything cruel in this world. That was the day my life changed forever. From then on, I wasn't just living for myself, I was living for him. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. My days were filled with endless shifts, sleepless nights, and a constant juggling act to make sure bills were paid. Food was on the table, and my son never felt the hunger or fear that I had known as a child. Every extra dollar I earned went toward his school books, his clothes, and his dreams. I carried holes in my shoes and wore the same old coat for years so he could feel proud walking into school. I wanted him to believe he was no less than anyone else. And for a long time, I believed my sacrifices were paying off. He was bright, so bright it sometimes scared me. Teachers called him gifted. He had this quiet, thoughtful way about him, like he was always studying the world and figuring out where he fit in. He wasn't the loudest child, but when he smiled, the whole room lit up. At night, when I dragged myself home after work, no matter how exhausted I was, I made time for him. We'd sit on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, and watch his favorite shows until he fell asleep on my shoulder. I'd carry him to bed, tuck him in, and stay for a moment longer, just to watch his peaceful face. It made every sacrifice worth it. But, as he grew older, things began to shift. The little boy who once ran into my arms after school started closing his bedroom door more often. The conversations that used to flow so easily became shorter, clipped. Fine, nothing, I don't know. That's what I got when I asked about his day. At first, I told myself it was normal, just teenage years, hormones, the awkward search for independence. But deep inside, I could feel the distance forming like cracks in glass. I tried to fight it. I tried cooking his favorite meals, asking about his interests, giving him space when he seemed annoyed. But the more I tried, the further away he drifted. He started spending more time outside the house, hanging around people I didn't know. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until late, and when I asked where he had been, he'd snap, "Why do you care?" Those words stung more than I let him see. Why did I care? Because I had given him everything I had, and then some. Because every drop of sweat, every tear, every sleepless night was for him. Still, there were good days that gave me hope. Sometimes he'd surprise me with a smile, or we'd share a laugh that felt like old times. On those rare nights, when we talked about his dreams of traveling, of building a career, of maybe even starting a family of his own one day, I let myself believe that the distance between us wasn't permanent, that beneath the teenage attitude, my son still loved me the way he once did. But those moments were fleeting, like sunlight slipping between storm clouds. More often, the house felt cold, silent, and heavy with unspoken words. I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to push him further away. Looking back now, I realize how fragile that balance was. I was clinging to the memory of who he used to be, blind to the shadows forming behind him. Something or someone was poisoning our bond, slowly twisting it into something unrecognizable. But at that time, I didn't know. I still believed I could fix it. I still believed I had time. If I had known the storm that was coming, if I had known about that one message that would shatter everything we had left, maybe I would have fought harder, maybe I would have asked different questions, or maybe nothing would have changed at all. All I knew then was this: he was my son, my whole world, and even as the distance grew, I never stopped loving him. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone buzzed. Nothing unusual, just the sharp little vibration I had felt 1,000 times before. I was folding laundry, humming to myself, trying to keep busy after another long day. My son had been quiet for the past few days, not answering much when I asked how he was doing. I thought maybe tonight I'd cook his favorite dinner, and see if we could finally talk. I wiped my hands on the towel and reached for the phone. I remember smiling, hoping maybe it was him saying he'd be home early, or that he wanted to eat together. I never expected the words that glared back at me. You're dead to me. Don't ever contact me again. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I blinked, rubbed them, read the message again, and again, and again. But no matter how many times I looked, the words didn't change. They were real. My body froze. It felt like my heart had stopped beating. My hands started to tremble, the phone slipping in my grip until it nearly fell to the floor. My knees gave out and I sank onto the couch as the room spun around me. Dead to me. Dead. How could my own child, the boy I carried, raised and loved with every piece of myself, say something so cruel? I felt the air leave my lungs, like someone had punched me in the chest. A sharp, suffocating ache spread through me. I clutched my shirt, as though I could hold my breaking heart together with my bare hands. My throat burned, but no sound came out, just silence. The silence was worse than screaming. I sat there, staring at the message, hoping it was a mistake. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe his phone had been stolen. Maybe anything but what it really was. I typed back with trembling fingers. Son, what do you mean? Please talk to me. I waited. The little dots didn't appear. No response. Minutes crawled by like hours. I sent another message. I love you. Please, don't shut me out. We can fix this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Still nothing. The phone screen mocked me with its silence. That's when the tears finally came. Hot, uncontrollable, streaming down my face as sobs shook my body. I pressed my palm against my mouth to muffle the sound, as if crying too loudly would make the words more permanent. My chest heaved, my shoulders quaked, and I buried my face in my hands. How could he hate me this much? Memories rushed through my mind in flashes. His first steps, the way he used to grab my finger when crossing the street, his laughter echoing in the park as I pushed him on the swings, his teenage years when he would sit across the table, rolling his eyes but secretly smiling at my silly jokes. Had all of that meant nothing to him. The laundry basket spilled to the floor as I doubled over, gasping for air. My body ached with grief I couldn't contain. It felt like mourning a death, but worse because this person wasn't gone. He had chosen to erase me while still breathing. I tried calling him, once, twice, 10 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. I left message after message. Please, just tell me why. Please. I need to hear your voice. I'm sorry for whatever I did. Just talk to me. But the silence was louder than words. I barely noticed when the sun slipped below the horizon and the room grew dark. Hours passed while I sat frozen, phone clutched in my hands like a lifeline that had already snapped. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I just replayed the message in my head on a loop. You're dead to me. Over and over. Like a curse I couldn't escape. When midnight came, I forced myself to stand, though my legs felt heavy as lead. I stumbled into his room. His bed was empty, sheets untouched, a cold, hollow space where warmth should have been. I pressed my hand against his pillow, inhaling the faint scent of his shampoo, and it broke me all over again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash something, to shake the walls until they answered me. But instead, I sank to the floor and curled into myself like a child. My tears soaked the carpet as I whispered his name into the dark, begging him to come back. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. Every time I blinked, I saw those words burned against the inside of my eyelids. By dawn, I was hollow, an empty shell, wandering through the motions of life. But inside, my heart was still bleeding. What had I done so wrong? Where had I failed him? The questions clawed at me, tearing me apart piece by piece. And yet, under all the pain, something else began to stir. A seed, a small, trembling spark of suspicion, because deep down, I knew my son. I knew his heart. And those words, you're dead to me, they weren't his. Not truly. Someone, somehow, had poisoned him against me. And though I didn't yet know how or why, I knew this. If he wanted me dead in his world, then he had no idea just how alive and determined I really was. The message had shattered me, but as I sat in the silence of that long night, one question wouldn't let me go. How did we get here? Question wouldn't let me go. How did we get here? It's easy to look at one text and think it came out of nowhere, but the truth is, the warning signs had been there all along. Small at first, so small I brushed them aside, convinced they were nothing more than ordinary family struggles. But little by little, those cracks widened, and I, blind with love and exhaustion, failed to see how deep they had grown. It started years ago, after my son entered high school. Up until then, we'd had our challenges. What parent doesn't? But he was still my boy, still the kid who asked me for advice on his homework, who sat at the kitchen table with me late at night when he couldn't sleep. But high school changed things suddenly. He had a whole new world that didn't include me, friends I'd never met, interests I didn't understand, secrets he guarded with a stubbornness I wasn't prepared for. I told myself it was normal, that every teenager needed space. Still, the distance stung. At first, it was harmless lies. He'd tell me he was at the library, but I'd later find out he'd gone somewhere else with friends. Or he'd say he finished his homework, only for me to discover crumpled, incomplete assignments stuffed into his backpack. I scolded him, of course. I thought discipline would steer him back, but my scolding only seemed to push him further away. And then came the fights, small arguments that grew into shouting matches. He accused me of being controlling, of treating him like a child. I accused him of being irresponsible, ungrateful. Neither of us listened. Neither of us understood. I remember one night vividly. He came home well past midnight, reeking of alcohol. My heart dropped the second I smelled it. Fear consumed me, not anger, but fear. I pictured him lying in a ditch, or worse, and the thought nearly drove me mad. I confronted him, voice trembling, begging him to see reason. But instead of hearing my fear, he only heard control. "You don't own me," he shouted, slamming his bedroom door so hard the walls rattled. I stood in the hallway, shaking, realizing that somewhere along the way, I had lost the little boy who once ran to me for comfort. But it wasn't just teenage rebellion. No, there was something darker threading its way into our lives. Whispers of manipulation I didn't recognize at the time. It began with a new friend, a name he mentioned once or twice, then more often, until it seemed this person had become the center of his world. I tried to ask about them, but every time I did, his walls went up. "Why do you care?" he'd snap, shutting me out completely. Soon, my son wasn't just distant, he was hostile. He began questioning everything I did for him, as if I were the enemy instead of the parent who had raised him alone. I could see the contempt in his eyes, a look that cut me deeper than any words ever could. And then, there was the money. I'd saved for year scraps and spare change, tucked away slowly but steadily to help pay for his college. It wasn't much, but it was everything I could manage. I never told him how many nights I went without so he could have more. One day, I logged into the account and found it nearly emptied. When I confronted him, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He muttered something about needing it for other things, but refused to explain. We fought louder, harsher than ever before. I screamed, he screamed, and in that moment, I saw someone I didn't recognize. He left the house that night and didn't come back until dawn. That was when the whispers of betrayal started to haunt me, because it wasn't just teenage rebellion. It wasn't just mistakes. It felt like someone had planted seeds of resentment in his mind, watering them until they grew into a wall between us. But who and why? I didn't have the answers then. I only had the weight of guilt pressing down on me. Was I too strict? Too soft? Did I fail him as a parent? Every mistake I had ever made replayed in my head like a cruel film. The nights I lost my temper, the times I was too tired to listen, the birthdays I couldn't afford to celebrate the way he wanted. I blamed myself for all of it, and yet, even in my guilt, I knew something wasn't right. My son's anger wasn't just toward MIT was shaped, sharpened, as if guided by an invisible hand. His words cut too precisely. His accusations sounded rehearsed, like someone else had whispered them into his ear. But back then, I pushed that thought aside. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself it was just part of growing up, that every parent goes through this. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing him. By the time that text came, "You're dead to me," the truth was this. The son I knew was already slipping away, piece by piece. I just hadn't realized yet how far gone he really was. After that message, silence became my constant companion. Days turned into weeks, and still, nothing from him. I kept waiting, hoping my phone would light up with an apology, or at least an explanation. But the screen remained dark, and every second of silence chipped away at me like a knife carving into stone. I tried everything. First, the texts, long, rambling paragraphs where I poured out my heart, begging him to tell me what I had done wrong. Shorter ones too, hoping maybe, if I kept it simple, he'd answer. "Please talk to me. I love you. I'm here, no matter what." each message sent into a void, swallowed whole by his refusal to acknowledge me. The little read notification never even appeared. It was like I no longer existed in his world. When the texts failed, I moved to calls, morning, afternoon, night. I dialed his number until my hands ached from gripping the phone. The ringing sound became torture. Each unanswered call, a reminder of how far away he really was. Sometimes it went straight to voicemail. Sometimes it rang endlessly before cutting off. Every time I left messages, my voice breaking as I pleaded for him to return my call. Son, it's me. Please, I just need to hear your voice. Just once. You don't have to forgive me. Just talk to me, please. I lost count of how many messages I left. Dozens, maybe hundreds. I imagined him listening to them, rolling his eyes, deleting them without a second thought, or worse, never listening at all. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the humiliation. One afternoon, I saw him across the street. He was walking with a group of friends, laughing like nothing in the world was wrong. My heart leaped. I rushed toward him, calling his name, hoping this was my chance. For a split second, our eyes met, and then, coldly, deliberately, he turned his back and walked away. His friends laughed, whispering to each other, and I stood frozen, heat rising in my cheeks. I had never felt so small, so invisible. The rejection cut deeper than any words. I told myself maybe he was just embarrassed. Maybe he'd come around in private. So that night, I went to his apartment. I stood outside his door with a bag of his favorite food noodles, the way he used to love them, steaming and fragrant. I knocked softly, then louder, when there was no answer. Son, it's me, I said, voice trembling. I brought you dinner. Can we please just talk? The door remained closed. I stood there for nearly an hour, knocking, waiting, praying. Finally, I heard movement inside his footsteps, coming closer. My heart soared, hope flooding back into me. But instead of opening the door, his voice came, sharp and cruel through the wood. Go away. I don't want you here. I froze, the bag slipping from my hand, noodles spilling across the doorstep. His voice was cold, detached, as if I were nothing but a stranger. I said, leave, don't come back. Tears blurred my vision as I stumbled down the hall, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the railing. The humiliation burned, but worse than that was the growing certainty that I was losing him completely. Still, I couldn't give up. I couldn't stop being his parent, no matter how much he pushed me away. I tried reaching him through family, aunt, a cousin, hoping they could talk sense into him, but every attempt backfired. He told them I was manipulative, controlling, toxic. Words I had never heard from his mouth before, words I never thought he'd use against me. It was like watching him be rewritten by someone else's hand. Every memory we shared erased and replaced with bitterness I didn't recognize. And yet, even as the rejection piled higher, I kept trying. I showed up at places I thought he'd be, the cafe he liked, the park we used to visit. Once, I saw him sitting on a bench, headphones in, staring at his phone. I walked up slowly, heart pounding, rehearsing what I'd say. But before I could speak, he looked up, saw me, and stood. Without a word, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the park. Every eye on me, as if I were the one who had done something shameful. The humiliation was unbearable. Nights blurred together as I sat alone, scrolling through old pictures of him, birthdays, vacations, little moments of joy frozen in time. I studied his smile, his eyes, searching for the boy I once knew. But the harder I looked, the more it felt like he was already gone. Still, I couldn't stop trying, because deep down, beneath the pain and the humiliation, a stubborn spark remained. I refused to believe this was truly him. I refused to believe my son, the boy I had raised, the boy who once loved me, had chosen to erase me completely on his own. No. Someone was pulling the strings. Someone was whispering poison into his ear, and if I couldn't reach him with love, I would find another way. For weeks, I lived in a fog of unanswered questions. Every attempt to reach my son only pushed him further away. It didn't make sense. The boy I raised, the one who once ran into my arms after school, who shared secrets with me late at night, wasn't the same person, spitting venom and slamming doors in my face. No child turns cold like that without reason. No child turns cold like that without reason. Something was wrong. It began with little details. At first, I brushed them off as coincidences, but soon, the pattern was impossible to ignore. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I stumbled on a post he had made. It wasn't about me directly, but the words stung like acid. Some people pretend to love you, but really they just want to control you. Cutting toxic ties is the only way to breathe. The comments underneath were filled with encouragement from strangers and a few familiar faces, but one in particular caught my attention, a name I didn't recognize. Their words stood out. Proud of you for finally seeing the truth. Don't let them suck you back in. Who were they? How did they know so much about me, about us? It didn't end there. A week later, I overheard a conversation between him and one of his cousins at a family gathering. My son didn't see me standing nearby, hidden by the doorway. She's not who you think she is, he whispered, his voice trembling with conviction. I know the truth now. They told me everything. My stomach dropped. Who was they? What truth was he talking about? I wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, but fear rooted me to the spot. If I pushed too hard, I risked driving him further away. The paranoia began to eat at me. Every silence, every rejection, every hateful word he threw at MIT, all felt rehearsed, planted, like someone was feeding him lines from a script. And then came the bills. I found credit card charges that weren't mine, purchases linked to my account, even though I hadn't made them. Expensive dinners, odd transfers of money, all tied to a name I didn't recognize. When I confronted the bank, they confirmed someone had been using my information, connected somehow to my son's circle. I froze. Was he involved? Or was someone close to him using this to drive a wedge between us, making me look guilty, making me look like a liar? The questions gnawed at me until I could hardly sleep. I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, playing back every interaction. I remembered the way he avoided my gaze when I asked about his new friends, the way he grew defensive when I questioned where he was spending his time. The boy who once told me everything was now guarding secrets with his life. But the universe has a strange way of dropping crumbs when you're desperate enough to look for them. One morning, I passed by his car parked outside his apartment. I shouldn't have, but something compelled me to glance inside. On the passenger seat sat a crumpled piece of paper. My pulse quickened as I leaned closer. It was a printed email, half-folded, words bold and unmistakable. Don't let her manipulate you again. Remember what she did. Stay strong. I've got your back. My hands shook. It wasn't signed. There was no name, just the message. But it was enough to confirm what I had feared all along. This wasn't random. Someone was deliberately poisoning his mind, feeding him lies, and twisting his memories until I was the villain in his story. The realization chilled me. It wasn't just about him shutting me out anymore. It was about control. Someone had a grip on him, and they were tightening it day by day. I started to notice other signs. A new phone number he wouldn't share with me. Conversations that stopped the moment I walked into the room. Whispers behind closed doors. His sudden hostility whenever I asked even the simplest questions. It was like he was living two lives, one with me shut out completely, and one where someone else had taken my place as his confidant, his guide, his anchor. And the most terrifying part, whoever it was, they knew exactly how to twist the knife. They brought up my mistakes, things I had confessed to my son years ago in moments of weakness, private truths I never thought he'd use against me. Suddenly, those moments were weaponized. He would throw them in my face, word for word, in a way that made my blood run cold. How could he remember them so vividly, unless someone had reminded him? The betrayal sliced deeper with every clue. I tried asking him outright once, desperate for answers. Who's been talking to you? Who's been putting these ideas in your head? He froze, his jaw-tight eyes darting away from mine. And then, like a curtain dropping, his expression hardened. You wouldn't understand, he muttered. They see the real you, the you I was too blind to see. They, my voice cracked. Who's they? But he wouldn't answer. He just walked away, leaving me trembling in the hallway, my questions echoing in the emptiness. The suspense gnawed at me. Every day, the faceless figure in my mind grew darker, more sinister. Was it a partner, a friend, a relative who had always resented me? I didn't know, but I knew this. Someone was pulling him away from me, brick by brick, until the wall between us was too high to climb. And if I didn't uncover the truth soon, I risked losing him forever. The truth hit me like a storm I couldn't ignore. For months, I had convinced myself that maybe my son's anger was just a phase, that maybe, with time, he'd see through the lies and come back to me. But denial has a cruel way of keeping you chained to false hope. Now, the pieces finally fit together. The messages, the poisoned whispers, the sudden hostility. all led back to one source. A single manipulative person who had sunk their claws into my son and twisted him against me. The betrayal was deeper than I ever imagined, and when I uncovered their name, the ground beneath me seemed to give way. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some distant acquaintance. It was family, the very relative I had trusted for years, the one I had defended countless times against others' suspicions. They had been the one whispering venom, replaying my past mistakes, and painting me as a monster until my own son couldn't bear the sight of me. I remember sitting in my car after learning the truth, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My first instinct was to scream, to drive straight to their house and tear the mask off their smug face. But then another thought crept in, colder, calmer, more dangerous. Screaming wouldn't fix this. Begging wouldn't fix this. But revenge, carefully planned and mercilessly executed, just might. For the first time in months, I felt the fog inside me clear. My son wasn't lost, not entirely. He was blinded, manipulated, pulled into a web of lies. If I wanted him back, I had to destroy the web at its center. And I knew exactly how. The idea didn't come all at once. It was more like a spark, small, fragile, but impossible to ignore. I thought about everything this relative valued, everything they hid behind, their reputation, their secrets, their lies, carefully tucked away so no one else could see. They had spent months portraying me as the villain. What if I flipped the script? What if I revealed who they truly were? Not through violence, not through shouting, but through undeniable, calculated truth. The thought made my pulse race. For years, I had held back, choosing peace over conflict, silence over exposure. I had covered for them, forgiven debts, buried scandals that could have ruined them. I thought I was protecting family, but in return, they had taken the one person I loved most and turned him into a stranger. And suddenly, I realized I wasn't powerless. I had receipts. I knew their secrets. I had evidence that could bring their carefully constructed facade crumbling down. The more I thought about it, the more my anger transformed into determination. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. If they wanted to play dirty, I would outmatch them at their own game. But I also knew I couldn't rush it. A reckless strike would only backfire, and I'd end up looking like the bitter parent they painted me to be. No, this had to be slow, deliberate, surgical. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in, so I began to plan. Step 1 was patience. I had to pretend nothing had changed. I had to let them believe they had won, that their poison had taken root and my son was lost forever. I smiled at family gatherings, even when my heart was breaking. I acted civil when I crossed paths with them. Even as my stomach churned with rage, I let them get comfortable, confident, careless, because I knew the moment would come when I could strike. Step 2 was information. I began collecting quietly, carefully, without raising suspicion. Old emails, bank records, photographs, whispered stories from people who had crossed paths with them. Every puzzle piece went into a folder I guarded with my life. The deeper I dug, the more horrifying the picture became. Lies, betrayals, even crimes hidden in plain sight. They had built their entire life on manipulation, using charm as a weapon and secrets as shields. And yet, they had underestimated me. Step 3 was strategy. I asked myself, what would hurt them most? It wasn't money, they could always make more. It wasn't distance, they thrived on conflict. No, what they valued most was their image, their reputation, the carefully polished mask they wore in front of everyone else. That was the target. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg. All I needed to do was hold up a mirror so the world could see what I had seen all along. The very thought gave me chills. For months, I had felt powerless, stripped of my role as a parent, cast aside like trash. But now, with a single idea, I felt stronger than I had in years. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my son, my dignity, and my life. And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I whispered a silent promise to myself. You wanted a war. Then a war you shall have. The flames of revenge had been lit, and once they burned, there would be no putting them out. I waited until the moment was right. Patience had been my secret weapon, letting them think their victory was complete, while I quietly gathered every piece of proof I could find. I had bank statements, old messages, photos, and a handful of recorded conversations I had the good sense to keep. Nothing flashy, just facts, cold, undeniable evidence that could cut through the stories they had spun about me. The first move was surgical. seed doubt in the places where they felt safest. I started tiny, a question from a well-placed friend, a casual mention in conversation, a quietly forwarded email. People noticed, then lingered, then asked. Reputation is built on silence. Remove the silence and it begins to crack. At a family barbecue meant to celebrate a new job for my daughter-in-law, I arrived like any other relative, polite, smiling, cordial. The manipulator sat there surrounded by nods and congratulations, their mask perfectly in place. They basked in it. That had been their greatest mistake. They believed performance would always trump truth. I didn't explode. I didn't accuse. I let the evening flow until people were comfortable. Wine glasses refilled, laughter soft. Then I asked to say something. They thought it would be a minor speech, the usual niceties. Instead, I asked for their attention and spoke clearly, slowly, without hatred, only facts. I have something I need to share, I said, not to ruin anyone, but because the truth matters. I pulled out the first piece of evidence, a printed bank transfer showing sums moved from my account into an account that traced back to a business associated with the manipulator. People tilted their heads, expecting an explanation to fall apart. I read the dates, the amounts, the reasons listed in those transactions, reasons that didn't match my life, reasons that painted me as extravagant and careless when, in truth, I had been the one scrimping to keep us afloat. A cousin who had always been skeptical leaned in. Where did that come from? She asked. From the records, I said. I've kept copies. There's more. I watched the color drain from their face as I methodically unfolded the story these papers told. Loans never repaid, favors that became debts, and words whispered behind closed doors designed to make me look unstable and unfit. I didn't embellish. I let the documents do the talking. The next strike was private, but devastating. I had a recording, a conversation I'd almost deleted years ago after a heated argument. In it, the manipulator spoke plainly, with no mask, about how convenient it would be if someone would finally stop her, and how a little pressure on my son would make that happen. Their laughter at the end of the clip still reverberated in my bones as I pressed play for the room. The laughter cut through the chatter like an axe. People hushed. My son's face went ashen. He hadn't been in the room with us when that tape was made. He had never heard the cadence of those words spoken with such cold intent. His mouth opened, closed, but no sound came out. I let him listen to it twice. The second time, he slumped against a chair, as if the air had been kicked from his lungs. The world he had been told was true collapsed in a slow, terrible motion. But I didn't stop there. I had screenshots of messages carefully saved, where the manipulator had prodded and guided, sending phrases and stories to my son like a puppet master feeding lines. There was a message telling him to remember the time she did X, and another, instructing him on how to respond when I tried to approach. The pattern was sickening in its clarity. Once the evidence compiled and the room's mood shifted from confusion to dawning horror, I played my final card. Testimony from people who had been quietly hurt by the manipulator's lies. Neighbors, an old friend, even a former employee, all of whom I had reached out to in the weeks before. They spoke calmly, their voices steady, recounting small injustices that now made sense when placed against the documentation. I watched my son the entire time. At first he looked like someone watching a bad dream, disbelieving, numb. But with each new fact, his expression faltered. The certainty that had hardened his heart softened into a shaky, raw hurt. I saw the gears turn, the realization that so much of his anger had been fed to him, rehearsed lines that were not his own. Finally, when the last piece of proof lay on the table like a verdict, he rose slowly. The years of ice he had wrapped around himself began to melt under the weight of the truth. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, there was recognition then, an expression I had both wanted and dreaded: shame. Mom. His voice was small, cracked. He stopped because what was left to say? How do you apologize for words that severed a life? How do you knit together years that had been cut with deliberate hands? Others in the room turned to him with questions, and the manipulator, exposed, lashed out in the only way they knew, with more lies and with fury at being unmasked. They tried to gaslight the evidence, to say it was taken out of context, to claim plotted schemes against them. But the records were clear, and the witnesses steady. The room, once their stage, became the scaffold where their performance crumbled. In the chaos that followed, my son stumbled outside into the cool air as if it might save him. I followed at a distance, not to confront, but to be close enough in case he fell apart. He sat on the curb, head in his hands, and betrayal gut-wrenching tears. Each SOB was a small forgiveness and a new wound. The confrontation in public did what weeks of pleading had not. It opened his eyes. He finally saw the pattern, the manipulation. He finally understood that he had been made a weapon against the one person who loved him the most. The betrayal cut deep, but it also cleared the fog. My revenge had not been about humiliation for the sake of cruelty. It had been surgical truth for truth, fact for fact, so that everyone, especially my son, could see clearly. I wanted him to have the whole picture laid out before him, so that whatever choice he made next would be informed by reality, not by someone else's script. When he looked up at me on that curb, the anger in his eyes had changed to something fragile and human. "I'm sorry," he whispered, as if the words alone could stitch the torn pieces back together. They could not yet. But the first step, the first honest, raw step had been taken. The manipulator had been exposed. The web had been torn. The path to healing, complicated and long as it would be, had finally begun. The night of the confrontation was already heavy with tension, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what came next. The manipulator, cornered and furious, spat lies like venom. My son stood between us, his body trembling as if torn in two. The air felt electric, every breath sharp, every silence louder than thunder. For months, I had carried the weight of their deceit. For months, I had let them define me, twist me into a monster in the eyes of my only child. But now the tables had turned. The evidence was undeniable. Their mask had shattered, and the world finally saw them for who they truly were. And yet, it wasn't enough. Exposing them in front of family had cracked the facade. But what I did next is what truly shocked everyone and finally severed the chains they had wrapped around my son's mind. I stepped forward, calm but unflinching. My son's eyes flickered between us, searching for direction, searching for truth. The manipulator hissed, "She's lying. She's always lied. You can't trust her." I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I reached into the folder I had prepared for this very moment. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled out a final envelope, one I had kept hidden, even from myself until that night. "This," I said, holding it high so everyone could see, "is the truth you don't want anyone to know." Gasps rippled through the room. My son stepped closer, curiosity mixing with dread. The manipulator's face blanched, their confidence faltering for the first time all evening. I opened the envelope and laid out the documents. Proof of fraud, theft, and betrayal so severe it left no room for excuses. Bank statements tying them to stolen funds, signed confessions they had once slipped into my keeping, thinking I'd never used them. Even police records buried incidents I had quietly covered up years ago to protect family. Each page landed on the table like a hammer. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is who's been whispering in your ear. The person you thought had your back has been using you, poisoning you, and destroying everything you love." My son picked up the papers with shaking hands. His lips moved as he read, his eyes darting back and forth, his entire world unraveling in real time. Tears welled, but not of anger, of clarity, of betrayal finally recognized. The manipulator lunged, snatching at the documents, shouting, "This is fake. She's desperate. She's making it all up." But the panic in their voice betrayed them. The lies that once dripped with confidence now sounded brittle, hollow. And then I did something no one expected. Instead of pressing further, instead of screaming or demanding apologies, I turned to my son and handed him the final piece of evidence, a handwritten letter, not from me, but from him. It was a note he had written years ago on my birthday, back when he was still a boy who saw me as his world. In it, he thanked me for always protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it. He wrote that I was the strongest person I know, and that one day he wanted to be like me. I had kept it all these years, folded away in a box of keepsakes, and now, in the middle of this chaos, I placed it in his hands as my last proof, not of the manipulator's evil, but of my love. The room fell silent, but of my love. The room fell silent. My son stared at the letter, his lips trembling as he read his own words back to himself. His knees buckled, and he sank into a chair, the weight of everything pressing down. "Mom," his voice cracked. "What have I done?" The manipulator's shouting turned desperate, incoherent. They grabbed at shoulders, begged others to side with them, but the tide had turned. One by one, the family members who had once nodded along with their lies stepped back, their eyes filled with disgust. "You used us," one cousin said coldly. "You nearly destroyed them," another added. And just like that, the power they had clung to slipped through their fingers. But the true climax wasn't their downfall, it was my son's breaking point. He stood, letters still in his hand, and turned to them with a fury I had never seen in him before. "You made me hate her," he shouted. "You made me believe she was the enemy. You took everything good I had and twisted it." His words cut through the room sharper than any blade. The manipulator staggered, speechless. Then, my son turned to me. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, but in that moment, I saw the boy I thought I had lost. He stepped closer, his voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I should have trusted you. I should have seen it." The apology wasn't just words, it was a confession, a plea, a desperate attempt to rebuild what had been broken. And then came the moment that shocked everyone. Instead of embracing him immediately, instead of accepting the apology in front of the crowd, I held up my hand. My voice didn't waver as I said, "Trust isn't built in a day. You believed lies over me once. If you want me back, you'll have to prove it just as I proved the truth tonight." Gasps erupted around us. Some thought I was cruel, others thought I was wise, but in that instant, I drew a line in the sand. Love didn't mean blind forgiveness. It meant accountability. It meant respect. My son's face crumpled, but then he nodded slowly. "I'll prove it," he said, determination cutting through the sorrow. "I'll make it right." The room was stunned. The manipulator was ruined, and I, the parent who had been cast out and vilified, now stood in the center of it all, not as a victim, but as someone who had reclaimed their voice, their dignity, and their story. The silence after the confrontation was deafening, like the calm after a devastating storm. For months, lies had clouded my son's judgment, turning him against me with a cruelty I never thought possible. But now the truth was undeniable, and the fallout had begun. My son's face was a battlefield of emotions. First came disbelief, his lips trembling as though they might deny what he had just learned. Then came anger, not at me, but at himself, at the invisible chains that had kept him tethered to lies. Finally, regret surged in like a flood, drowning whatever resistance he had left. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't know." His words carried the desperation of a child who had just realized he burned the only bridge back home. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling freely down his cheeks. For so long, he had been convinced I was the enemy. Now, standing in the rubble of deceit, he saw me clearly, and the weight of his betrayal crushed him. Around us, the people who had cheered his distance from me now stood in awkward silence. Neighbors, friends, relatives, those who had believed the lies without question looked down, shifted uncomfortably, and avoided my eyes. I could almost hear their thoughts. "We thought we knew. We thought we were helping him. We were wrong." One of his friends finally spoke, voice trembling. "We really thought you were toxic. We thought we were protecting him." But their excuses didn't matter anymore. They had joined in the chorus that had hurt me, and now the truth exposed their blindness. They, too, would live with that shame. The one who had orchestrated this entire nightmare, the relative who had poisoned my son's mind, stood cornered. Their smugness had evaporated, replaced by sputtered excuses and weak justifications. "I only did what was best," they stammered, but no one bought it. The crowd, once their allies, now pulled away. Eyes that once admired them were filled with disgust. They were unmasked, and no amount of smooth talking could rebuild what they had destroyed. Their power collapsed in that moment, and they were left isolated in the very web of lies they had spun. Justice had a face, and it was the look of rejection that they now endured. For me, the fallout wasn't loud or vengeful. It was quiet, almost serene. For months I had carried humiliation, rejection, and unbearable grief. Now, I felt a strange stillness, a peace born from vindication. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to gloat. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. My revenge wasn't about hurting anyone, it was about reclaiming my dignity. And in that moment, dignity was fully restored. That evening, when the crowd had dispersed and the manipulator had been cast aside, my son came to me. His shoulders sagged, his face streaked with tears. "Mom," his voice broke as he said the word. "Please, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean the text. I didn't mean to say you were dead to me. I was lost." Hearing him, my heart ached. The words he had written, "You're dead to me," still echoed in my memory like a cruel ghost. Forgiveness could not erase that pain. "Not yet," I told him gently, but firmly. "You can't erase the past, but you can choose what you do now. If you want to be my son again, prove it with your actions." He nodded, sobbing quietly. His regret was real, and though it couldn't heal me instantly, It planted the seed for something new. That news of what happened spread quickly, as stories always do. The betrayal, the manipulation, my revenge. It became the tale whispered in kitchens, shared in hushed tones at gatherings. But unlike before, I wasn't the villain of their story. Now, I was the survivor. The mother who had endured cruelty and still emerged unbroken. Some admired me, some feared me, some felt guilty for believing the lies. But no one could ever dismiss me again. My story had power, and its ripples reached far beyond my own circle. It became a warning about the dangers of blind loyalty, about how easily manipulation can ruin families. But the real consequence wasn't what others thought. It wasn't even my son's regret or the manipulator's downfall. It was the shift inside me. For so long, I had begged for validation, prayed for acceptance, longed for someone to see the truth. Now, I realized I no longer needed anyone's approval. The truth was mine. My revenge was complete. I stood taller, breathed easier, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Justice, I learned, doesn't always arrive with noise and fury. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the tears of a regretful son, in the shame of a fallen liar, in the whispers of a community forced to face their mistakes. And sometimes justice isn't about destroying others, it's about reclaiming yourself. As I looked at my son, broken but willing to rebuild, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter. The scars would remain, but scars are proof of survival. He once texted, "You're dead to me." Now, through the fallout of revenge, he finally understood. Bonds can be tested, broken, and betrayed, but the truth always finds a way to rise. And in that truth, I had found not only justice but peace. The house was quiet again, though silence no longer felt like the heavy burden it once was. Months earlier, silence meant rejection, abandonment, a son who had cast me aside with a single cruel sentence. Now, the silence carried something different, a strange kind of peace, fragile but real. I sat by the window, looking out at the same streets that had once felt hostile, filled with whispers and judgmental stares. Today, they seemed calmer, though I knew the memory of what happened would linger in every corner. People would talk for years. My name, my story, my revenge, it had all become part of their narrative. But as I stared out, I realized I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living for their approval. The words my son had written, "You're dead to me," had shattered me. For weeks, I had carried that wound, replaying it in my head until it threatened to consume me. It had been more than words. It was a declaration that I no longer mattered to the person I had given life to. But now, those same words had become a strange source of strength. I had survived them. I had fought back against the lies that poisoned him. And I had emerged, not as a victim, but as someone who had taken control of her story. Revenge hadn't healed me completely, but it had restored something far more important, my dignity. Yes, I had won. The truth had been revealed. The betrayer had fallen, and my son finally saw the reality he had been blind to. But victories like these are never clean. They are painted in shades of gray, tinged with sadness, because for all that was gained, so much had been lost. Trust once broken doesn't come back overnight. My son's tears and apologies, though genuine, couldn't erase the months of pain. The countless nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering why my love wasn't enough. Winning the battle didn't erase the scars. They would remain, etched into my memory, a reminder of what betrayal feels like when it comes from your own child. In the days after the fallout, my son tried, again and again, to mend what was broken. He called more often. He visited, sometimes sitting in silence, sometimes pouring out regrets like water from a broken dam. His efforts were clumsy but earnest. And though part of me longed to embrace him fully again, another part whispered caution. Forgiveness couldn't be rushed. Love might still live between us, but it was cautious now, wary of being wounded again. He was no longer the innocent boy who once clung to my hand. He was a man who had chosen wrong, suffered for it, and now carried the burden of regret. And I was no longer just his mother. I was the mirror he had to face, the reminder of what he had nearly lost. Through all the heartbreak, I had grown in ways I never expected. Before this, I had lived too much for others, for my son's approval, for the community's respect, for the illusion of a perfect family. When that illusion shattered, I thought I had nothing left. But I discovered something deeper. I had myself. My worth wasn't defined by whether my son loved me or whether the community respected me. My worth was in my resilience, my ability to rise even when life tried to bury me. Revenge had been my turning point, but survival, that was my true victory. Still, the scars were undeniable. Certain phrases, certain glances, even the sound of a text notification, still made my heart race with remembered pain. Trust was no longer something I gave freely. Love felt more guarded, protected by invisible walls. And yet, scars are not just marks of damage, they are proof of survival. They remind us not only of the pain endured, but of the strength it took to endure it. My scars would remain, but I no longer saw them as signs of weakness. They were medals of survival, badges of truth. The hardest part of resolution was accepting the duality of motherhood, loving a child even when they hurt you, and holding them accountable even when your heart aches to forgive. My son would always be my son. No manipulation, no betrayal, no cruel words could sever that bond entirely. But unconditional love didn't mean unconditional trust. He would have to earn back what had been broken, and I would let him try, but on my terms, at my pace. As I sat with my thoughts, I realized that my revenge wasn't just for it was also a message to my future self, a reminder that I was stronger than I ever believed, that I could survive abandonment, humiliation, and heartbreak. And if I could survive this, I could survive anything. If someone were to hear my story, and many already had died, hoped they would take this lesson. Never doubt your worth because someone else fails to see it. Even the people closest to us can betray us. But betrayal doesn't define who we are. What defines us is how we respond, how we rise, how we reclaim the dignity we thought we lost. The journey had cost me dearly. My heart still bore cracks. My trust still trembled on shaky legs. But I had not been defeated. My son once texted, "You're dead to me." But as I closed my eyes that night, I realized something powerful. I wasn't dead. I was alive, stronger, wiser, scarred but alive. And perhaps that was the truest revenge of all. The story could have ended the moment my son broke down. The manipulator was exposed, and the truth finally set me free. But endings aren't always clean. Real life doesn't wrap itself neatly in ribbons. It leaves you with echoes, with haunting thoughts that follow long after the confrontation is over. And as I sit here, reflecting on everything that happened, I realized the most powerful part of this story isn't what was said, it's what remains unsaid. The words, "You're dead to me," will never leave me. They were branded into my memory, a cruel scar etched not on my body but on my soul. Even now, months after the truth came out, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night hearing those words again. For a fleeting second, I'm back in that dark place, the one where my son had cut me out completely, where I was unwanted, unloved, erased. But then, I remind myself, I survived. The irony is chilling. He thought those words would kill me, but in reality, they gave birth to someone stronger. If you're listening to my story right now, don't think it's only about me. This could be your story too. Maybe not the same words, maybe not the same betrayal, but the same kind of pain, the kind that cuts deeper than a knife because it comes from someone you trusted most. Betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it's from the person sitting across your dinner table. Sometimes, it's in the form of a text message that shatters your heart in seconds. And when that betrayal comes, you'll face the same question I did. Do I collapse under it, or do I rise and make them regret ever doubting me? People often think revenge is loud, explosive, violent. But the truth, the most devastating revenge, is quiet. It's when the truth comes out slowly, like water dripping on stone, eroding lies until nothing remains. That's what I did. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't fight with fists. I fought with patience, with evidence, with calm determination. And in the end, my silence was more terrifying than any outburst. Because when the truth finally exploded, it left everyone stunned, not by my anger, but by my resilience. Now, I'll ask you this. If your own child or your parent or your partner or your best friend sent you a message like that, what would you do? Would you collapse? Would you walk away forever? Or would you do what I did, stand up, gather every shred of strength you have left, and turn their betrayal into the stage for your greatest victory? Think carefully, because betrayal is inevitable. Someone, someday, will hurt you, and in that moment, you'll have to choose whether you become the victim of the story or the author of your revenge. Even with victory, scars remain. I want to be honest about that. My son regrets his words, but regret doesn't erase them. Our relationship is healing, yes, but it will never return to the innocent trust it once had. And maybe that's okay, Because maybe the point of betrayal isn't to break us, it's to change us, to strip away our illusions, to force us to see the truth about the people we love and about ourselves. I'll never forget what he wrote, and I'll never be the same. But maybe that's what survival looks like, living with the scar, and finding strength in it. Sometimes, I wonder if losing a child through betrayal is worse than losing them to death. Death, at least, is final. Betrayal lingers, haunts, rewrites every memory you thought was safe. But betrayal also teaches us who we are without the people we thought we couldn't live without. And sometimes, losing someone at least for a while is the only way to find yourself. So I'll leave you with this thought. We spend so much of our lives trying to keep the people we love close, but what happens when they push us away? What happens when they declare us dead in their lives? That's when we discover something terrifying, and yet liberating. That survival doesn't depend on their love. That dignity doesn't depend on their approval. That revenge isn't about destroying them, it's about refusing to let them destroy you. My son once texted, "You're dead to me." But in the end, it wasn't me who died, it was the version of me that depended on him to define my worth. And maybe that's the most chilling truth of all. Sometimes, losing a child is worse than death, but sometimes, it's the only way to save yourself. It's the only way to save yourself.